an original MCM production.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? What's going on?
Welcome to What's Going On with Martha Love. I am your guest host today, Tosha Davis, and we are excited to be here for part 2 of our interview with President and CEO of Universal Companies, Raheem Islam. Welcome back, Raheem.
Well, I just love that, What's Going On. That's beautiful. That's one of the greatest songs of all times.
Definitely,
And
definitely.
it's so fitting to everything that we do.
Yes.
So what a great show. What a great title. What a great name. I love it.
The perfect place to
I
be.
know.
What's
Martha
going
Love
on and what's going
and what's
on.
going on. I love it.
Perfect title. Yeah. So we are so glad to be able to be back here to continue our conversation that we started. We didn't get as far as we thought we were going to get in the last conversation, but we're going to see how far we can get today.
There.
So
Well, this might be part 3.
there may be a part
Yeah,
3. We'll
okay.
see.
All right,
If
cool.
Martha is gracious enough to allow us to come back.
Okay, yeah.
So
wrap this up.
you know what I do for radio, right?
You throw me off. I'm like,
So for our audience who don't know what we're talking about, Raheem is also the host of a radio show called Universally Speaking with Raheem Islam. And on that show, I have the honor of being his co-host. So he's talking about the signals that I give him when we
Yeah.
need to wrap up, go to break, cut, take a call. So we'll get a chance to talk
throws
about
me off every time.
we'll get a chance to talk about Universally Speaking also
Okay.
as we move into the outreach portion of what it is that Universal Companies does. So when we left off and we were talking last, we had talked about how Universal Companies began, your relationship, how you met Mr. Gamble, Kenny Gamble from TSOP, The Sound of Philadelphia, and how you all started this Universal Companies, which basically wasn't just a company that you just opened up. It was some events, it was a movement, it was to create change in Philadelphia. And we also talked about how you started and you got involved in education management. And in Philadelphia, just so we can refresh our audience, in Philadelphia, you have how many schools?
We have 8 schools. We
Okay.
have a high school, 2 middle schools, and 5 elementary schools,
Okay.
or K-8 schools.
Okay.
But I want to also just say the Foundation for Universal Companies, really under Kenny Gamble's leadership. Kenny Gamble's not only icon internationally, but in Philadelphia, he's also a beloved person who's always been conscious about our community.
And
wanted
he's
to
the
give-
founder of Universal Companies.
founder of Universal, founder of Philly International Records, and founder of so many other organizations, all supported everything going on in the black community in Philadelphia since he's been around. He's been the go-to person. What Universal really is a building on the foundation of many other previous movements.
Okay.
With Leon Sullivan and OIC.
Which Milwaukee is very familiar with.
Right, and
OIC
Philadelphia,
and
Leon Sullivan's one of the great leaders in Philadelphia. The Cecil B. Moore and NAACP.
Yes.
The Jeremiah Shabazz of the Nation of Islam. Marcus Garvey. I mean, it's really the culmination, as you said earlier. Universal Companies is not just a company. We use those vehicles and those tools, but in reality, it's a movement for change in our community and trying to address systemic change in our community.
And so one of the vehicles that Universal has chosen, and this was strategic, this was not something, and it maybe had been after trying some other things, but ultimately the decision was made that at some point you needed to get into education management.
Well, actually, we didn't. It wasn't that precise. It was somewhat something we pointed in our direction when we started looking at. We've always looked at the issue of our community and tried to assess it, and not knowing many of the things we've come to know over the years. Is that it's much more complicated than we could have ever imagined. In fact, if we would have known it was this complicated,
You would have never.
no. I would have probably said, you know what? This is over.
Let's go and try the music thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to sing or something. You know what I mean? No way in the world could we have understood the complexity of the conditions that facing the black community in America, and its connection to our history in this country. And so, one thing led to another. In fact, we had our biggest real estate development project. We were so excited. We're going to change the world with this real estate project. It was only like a 40-unit development or something, and at that time it was the biggest project we have done. It was like a $7 or $8 million project, and we're going to get the black contractors working, and we're going to get the black.
It's going to change the city.
We're going to get the. You know, we had trouble even getting the people to even want to sign up for the houses, and so we said, well, wow, well, what's that about?
Right.
You know, and so we put that on hold. Let's focus on how we're going to get these contractors on the jobs, and then we got hit with a whole set of different other circumstances that we had no knowledge of. But those contractors have been fighting this fight for years,
right?
Trying to get sustainability in an environment, trying to get traction so they can be able to build their businesses and compete. And even to the day in 2015, the black contracting situation predominantly around the country is the same, and the same struggle exists. So we took on that struggle and said, to support that struggle, we said, well, these contractors need some back office operations.
Right.
They need some support. They need access to capital. They need access to opportunities.
Okay.
So let's see if we could do all those things. So we created, in addition to our universal community homes and developing houses and created a pipeline of housing, we created a universal business support center.
Okay.
Which was
for training?
Was primarily support small contractors.
Okay.
Technical assistance, consolidating back office
Build
operations,
capacity.
Infrastructure, marketing, finance, you name it. And then we said it wasn't enough to try to get access to capital, and the lenders weren't giving it to us. So we became our own bank.
Okay.
We created Universal CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, and we would be our own lender. So we started to realize that these issues were bigger.
There were layers. It was an onion. You peel back one layer, and you're like, oh,
this is ridiculous. This is like, wait, we didn't settle for this.
We was just gonna build some houses.
We wanted to see, our people enjoy, be a part of this economic explosion we were undertaking. And then it led us to another concept, that getting our men on the jobs, and we found out that the unions couldn't take them because they couldn't. The word was they couldn't pass the exams to get into become apprentice.
Okay.
But it was much more deeper than that. But let's say we settled with that. So we created Universal Center for Employment Training. So as a job training program, it was a pre-apprenticeship program to prepare young men for what they said these men couldn't do, is pass the exam, to get into apprenticeship, to get into the unions so they can get on these jobs.
Okay. So here you've come down another layer from the housing.
But that's where you see now we have, I just gave you 4 companies.
Right
there,
Universal companies.
That part of Universal companies. And then we said, well, we chasing our tails here. All of these things have its direct line and root to a failed education system. And so that led us to education. So we never said we wanted to be an education manager.
Right. No, but it was,
and
after pulling back those layers and realizing where the issue really was.
The other thing is that we fundamentally also knew that we're dying now. And the education issue was just such a long-term effort. So it wasn't something that we would really thought was the answer when we were needing, you need relief today.
Right.
And then you come and say, well, we'll wait 12 years.
Wait till we graduate some kids. Just hold on.
Yeah, just people on. Are you kidding me?
Right.
So we had to do a multitude of things together, but it put us in the space of now looking at this thing in a much more holistic way.
Okay.
Looking at it in a much more realistic way, examining and understanding the outcomes that we see, how those outcomes are developed, and education is essential. And one of the things that we found in the education, in addition to the system being broke, and structurally broke, is always out of money, is always up in the air, it's always something wrong with the education system in Philadelphia, and really in almost every majority minority city, we find
Right.
the same kind of conditions taking place.
Right.
Failed education system. We started looking and unpacking the education system, and it's no way it could work given where it's right now.
Exactly.
So we had to take some kind of way and take ownership of it.
Right.
And at that time, there was no way. You either go to private school, so we opened a private school.
Okay.
Most people don't know we
Had a private
we had a
school.
private school, and what we did was we went and consolidated about 6 or 7 of the small private schools
and
to
brought them
try
together.
to bring them
Universal.
Well, we tried to bring them to one to see if we can give them capacity so they can pay their teachers a decent wage with benefits.
Right.
Many of the teachers who worked in these private schools were weren't compensated the way they
Right.
needed to be.
Right.
It was run very ragtag.
They didn't have an infrastructure.
And so we tried that path. So we tried a
Couple different trial and- right.
Yeah, we tried before we took on
8 schools.
Well, yeah,
and
before-
then 12 schools.
Exactly.
And then
No,
14
but
schools. and-
this is not. People look up now and say, "Well, what are you doing, Raheem?" I says, "Well, I'm just trying to figure this
It
thing
out.
out." So it led us into the education and. Not only the infrastructure is not, and then we can get into it, much more in a much more deeper conversation later. But the infrastructure cannot, left alone, deal and produce a better outcome for our children.
Okay.
That's a fact. All right. So whether it's unions, whether it's too many white teachers, not enough black teachers who care, whether it's superintendents, whether it's politics, whether it's board versus governance, it don't matter. It's the
end
structure
result is the same.
It's the same.
It's failing.
And so we had to insert ourselves and figure out a way. How do we get control over a scale of children? Not some of these schools. Private school, 50 students, and
Right.
You can't make a difference. You got
There's-
200,000 students,
Right.
and you got 10.
Right, you're not going to be able
Yeah,
to.
you could
impact.
feel good about yourself,
Right.
but the reality is you
You're not
ain't
making
moving
impact,
nothing.
right. You're not moving the needle
No,
at
you
all.
could do this forever and still see the problems we face in our community that have its roots in why our young people can't get on jobs, why we don't have enough entrepreneurs in business working properly, why we are not controlling our neighborhoods, why everything that we see, why we have the demise of our families, why we have this mass incarceration, all of these things, why are our health issues, you name it, every one of those issues connected to education. But it's not just the physical education, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's the education about who we are.
Okay, so that's the
And-
cultural
and-
knowledge of self.
Well, knowledge of who we are and why are we here. I wrote just recently, how else could we have, and Malcolm said it in 1963, he says, anybody who delivers their children to the oppressor and to be educated
Educated.
is a fool.
Correct.
Now, I know he was very gangster when he
Right.
said it, and it wasn't probably really received very well.
But when you break it
But when you
down-
look at it, and you send black children to a predominantly white school, are they going to give them the tools,
That they need.
the self-determination tools?
Right.
Are they going to teach them to love themselves? Are they going to teach them how to compete with them?
Right. No,
And not only compete with them, how to defeat them?
exactly.
Are they going to teach them how to unpack what has been done to them and use that as energy and fuel to further their goal individually and collectively?
For the community.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
And so nobody talked about this, so we were just so infatuated with the American system and that we believe that we take this pathway, and we've done as a black people in this country, tried to do whatever we thought was the right thing to be accepted
Right.
as American citizens, but we still lost a lot in the process. So education was a very big tool, and we started our school in 1999, our first school. We so gun ho again. we're going. I can't even tell you the atrocities to get the buildings that we needed to get because there were so many catch-22s. That the charter says we was able to go through this whole charter route, and right back then the concept of a charter, you was the nastiest thing
Right.
on the planet.
Coming against
you
right,
was
public
you
school.
was the devil himself.
So you did this 8 schools. You started with the charter, and we know that there were some different things of how you ended up with the schools that you ended up with in Philadelphia. And so then I just want to fast forward a little bit because we still need to make it from Philly to Milwaukee.
Well, we got a couple more cities to go through before we get to Milwaukee.
So,
but no, I'm just joking.
Well, that's going to be on the development. That's going to be on the development side. So with education, so you have these schools. You've been now, it'll be 15 years that you've been in education.
Well, it's not linear.
Okay.
It's been a rumble.
Okay.
It's been a fight.
But since, we just want to say
from
since
day one,
1999.
and I want people to understand that, and for our community to understand, none of this is like like a direct line.
Right.
This has been a zigzag.
Right.
Of monstrous proportions.
Right.
Because for every step that we've made, in many cases, there has been opposition at every level. Because the very thing that is most needed is the most difficult thing to do. And why is it so difficult to do in this environment? Is because we've had 400 or 500 years of history where that kind of independence is not really wanted.
Exactly.
And
So
even
you're
our
fighting
most
against the infrastructure
even our
system.
most liberal people who spout, well, we got to help them. In the back of their minds, they really are not comfortable with seeing the black community on its own, working by itself and doing for itself.
Empowered.
It really is conflicted in this country, even in 2015.
Right.
So every step along the way, there's been fights and rumbles and enemies from, we don't even know who they are, but they come after us every step of the way. And so we've been able
Seen
to
and unseen.
Exactly. We've been able to mount a campaign and continue the path. And again, we don't have a philanthropic donor standing behind us
Or an
and saying,
endowment that's speeding
which many of our competition has.
Right.
In this whole private sector of public education, in this environment, we were looking at the Waltons.
Right,
exactly. These guys were putting money out all over the country. The Gates Foundation.
Yes.
And there are 25, 30 of these guys.
Right.
There's Wall Street multi-billionaires who are putting money out, but not a dollar's coming to Universal.
Exactly.
You know why? Because we're black, we're run by black, governed by black, for black people, and that's unacceptable.
That does not fit into
No. So don't get it twisted. This is a rumble of all proportions to achieve what Malcolm said in 1963 is to educate our own children. And even once we even got some infrastructure and built some infrastructure and got made some progress, then there's some internal issues we got to deal with. We got to deal with principals and leaders, assistant principals and teachers who don't know even about the struggle.
Exactly.
Who've been educated by a system to support the oppression of their own people.
Then coming in also and re-educating them to what.
Well, how do you do all that?
Right, at the same time.
It's like, are you kidding me? This is
building the car as you building the car while you're driving it.
Or building the plane
while you flying it. So, but I do think that it speaks volumes that you've been in this area since 1999, because there are many schools that I'm sure you've seen open since that time that are not still around. And for this organization to still be...
Well, we barely.
For this organization...
I say, here's what I say. But the thing of it is that this is what is, again, I talked about earlier about the unknown. This is why our community is not making the progress that we all envision in our minds, that we should be able to. It's the nasty foundation stuff.
Right.
It's the infrastructure,
the sludge and the dirt.
It's the systems that we are not familiar with. It is the all of the stuff that keeps us, that blocks it, and that we have no knowledge of until we start ownership.
Right, and you're already in the game. And
well,
you gotta figure it out.
Well, and it's multi-layered, and so it's really, this whole process is ability to try to stay in business and build infrastructure when you're not really being supported, and at the same time stay true to your mission and your vision. which is to help rebuild the black community. Now, trust me, I am pro humanity. I believe in one creator and one humanity.
Okay.
So I am not anti anyone.
But being for something doesn't make you
Exactly.
anti.
Well,
against.
I have to be pro African American, pro black because of the condition of the black community.
Right.
And it's if, for example, I believe in charity. I believe in helping, but charity must start at home.
With her own people. So
this is why we stay in the fight, but it's been one step, sometimes 2 steps back. Hopefully we can make one step, hold it, then make another step. But it's been very difficult.
But I do want to commend you for staying in the game, because I'm sure there were many times when you could have said, you know what, I can just go back. I can just go back. It's so much easier to build buildings and.
Well, even that has its own set of issues as well.
Right.
But when you start trying to build people, it is a much more difficult thing than building physical buildings. Yes,
right.
But even there lies a whole set of challenges that if you're not in that, you will know. You don't know why our contractors are not flourishing. You don't know why black developers are not flourishing. You don't know why black businesses are not flourishing, or investment is taken in our community. There's a reason why, and we've kind of stumbled into those reasons, and we're trying to deal with them.
So there is an intra connection between the real estate development, the education, which you just broke down for us, how you kind of back-ended into education from starting with the real estate, and then the third prong, which would be the community organizing. So let's stay in Philly before we come to Milwaukee.
Okay.
And you're doing development in Philly, you're doing schools in Philly, and then you decide to branch out on the East Coast.
Well, let me just say, we had branched out. We probably done a ton of work outside of Philadelphia. First of all, let me tell you, when you first started working on and here's the kind of boxes that the society puts you in, and sometimes if you accept them, you're going to blow, and that's why we were universal.
Right.
And people say, well, why aren't you the 15th Street CDC? You know,
Right.
We wouldn't accept that.
Right.
Well, one of the things
We don't want to be pigeonholed into that.
Well, what happens is, and even though that's our neighborhood, we're now in 15 neighborhoods. Well, that neighborhood is not big enough. The politics, the resources, the concept is not big enough to allow us to stay in this neighborhood
Right.
and perfect it. So we were always looking for opportunities to use our expertise and get a compensation for that to feed and
right,
fuel.
because there has to be something that's coming in to support
to
the
fuel,
movement.
to fuel the movement in those focused areas
Right.
that we were working in. And so we did real estate development all over the East Coast.
Okay.
And it gave us the capacity to understand how to work outside of
Home.
neighborhoods, outside of Philadelphia. And so that gave us the kind of understanding, and then understanding the politics in these cities,
Right.
how they're governed, understanding the communities in the city, their needs. So we started to get a different appreciation for how things are done in different places.
Okay.
What gave us a little bit more of capacity to venture out into other neighborhoods,
Okay.
other
so
cities.
Other cities. So you start in Philly, you go up East Coast, Newark, New Jersey, Canton.
A lot of things with Camden right across we call it East Philadelphia, but it's a whole new city in New Jersey. We did a lot of things in Atlantic City, which is South Jersey and North Jersey, and Newark and Jersey City. Then we did some things in Washington, D.C. We did some things in Baltimore. And so we were known. We were growing the brand. We were known for not just Kenny Gamble and a beautiful connection. We leveraged him up the kazoo. But we were starting to be known as a change agent.
Okay.
And that we can get things done.
Okay.
And so that kind of brand started to grow. In spite of some of the organizational challenges we might have run into, or some of the systemic issues we dealt with, people knew that if we got our hands on it, we would get it through.
Okay.
And they were looking for that in different markets. They were looking for solutions, but they also knew that those solutions had to be organizations who could go through all of the nonsense and get to the end zone.
Result. Okay.
Right.
So you do development in Philadelphia, the East Coast. Then your antennas are up and you're going to Atlanta and you're going to Texas and you're going to other cities, and you end up almost 10 years ago here.
Well, one of the things
In Milwaukee.
what was a national platform, or pretty much a national platform, was the concept of HUD's Hope 6
Okay.
development, which is a tool, the kind of a large scale HOPE program to convert
Public housing.
traditional, conventional public housing and to pretty much blow it up.
Right.
To change it completely from these concentrated enclaves of poverty and integrate them into the community. So
Right.
all across the country, these conventional public housing sites that were, defined and
Right.
the
No.
projects
Right, you look-
were now redone.
Okay.
And so we were able to, over that period of time, be involved in 4. And those 4 led us to want to look in New Orleans and Atlanta, Chicago, and these projects were being
Right.
being now advertised by the housing authorities, and we could compete for them,
Right.
including Milwaukee. And that was my first.
Visit here. Was it in
my-
the summer? Was it in the was it in the summer or the winter?
It was
Because we really don't
definitely-
have.
If it was the winter, I probably would have
Never came back. That
Right.
must have been the
It was the
summer.
summer, and it was so beautiful, and so I had no idea how cold it is in Milwaukee. But it was my first flight to Milwaukee,
Okay.
specifically for this housing development to be a part of, or at least to figure out if we could be a part of. And that was my first introduction to Milwaukee.
So you come here, you visit, you work on potentially getting involved with a housing project here. That housing project does not end up happening for you.
Oh, like
sir.
many. Trust me. Hey, look, to get one, you
gotta-
might have to go 10. All right,
So that
trust
doesn't
me.
come through, but-
it ain't. That was not
Right,
unusual.
right. So, but Mr. Gamble has a connection with a gentleman that used to work for Miller Coors, Jim Thompson.
Right.
Who also lived here in Milwaukee.
Right.
Who thought that the model that Universal was using in Philadelphia would be perfect.
We did a big Black Enterprise did a big article on us, probably about 6 or 7 years ago. They
Okay.
came to Philadelphia and spent almost 2 weeks with us.
Okay.
And they did 6-7 page spread of Universal and as a Black business. Right. And by the way, they did a huge article on Gamble and Huff in 1979. So,
okay.
Mr. Graves and his son, and at that time his son, now Butch Graves, and the whole Black Enterprise team were really excited about Universal.
Right.
And that's what Jim Thompson read.
We're gonna take a break. We're gonna come back.
Right.
We're not gonna stay where we are because we're on
following
the
your
state
lead.
line.
You can't. You gotta shut me up.
We're on the
Because
state
I got
line.
a lot to say.
So we're going to come back and then we're going to talk about getting into Milwaukee, real estate development Milwaukee, and then we're going to talk about education here
Okay.
in Milwaukee and tie in that final thing, the community.
Organizing.
Yes, and if we
Okay.
don't get to it, we're going to get it when we come back.
All right.
Thank you. You're watching What's Going On with Martha Love. I am your guest co-host, Tosha Davis.
She passed away about 6 months ago. Sure, yeah, they missed their mom. It was hard to learn that there was no cure. You know, you don't want to see somebody that you love suffer. So we sought hospice care. Hospice people made her feel comfortable and pain-free. At first, the girls didn't know what was going on. The girls knew that Mommy was sick, that Mommy wasn't feeling well, but they didn't know that Mommy was going to die. I don't always have the answers, the best answers to the questions that they're going to ask about what's going on, and often the hospice people would be there, and they helped. You know, they helped me and the girls through just an incredibly hard time.
114th Infantry Company, Iraq.
The memories are all blurred.
I don't know what's wrong with me.
The words, they're hard to find.
I came back a different person.
I wonder if she's better off without me.
You just feel alone.
You gave all to the cause of freedom. Now it's our turn to give our all to you. It's free and totally confidential. Reach us at OperationNotForgotten.com. We are here.
Being a gold medalist skier requires a lot of hard work, intense training, and time outside on the mountain. But taking care of my skin is easy and doesn't affect my performance. Every day I apply sunscreen and wear protective gear. I know protecting my skin will help prevent skin cancer and avoid wrinkles. I get my skin checked regularly by a dermatologist. 1 in 5 Americans will develop some form of skin cancer in their lifetime. My name is Julia Mancuso and I'm wearing orange to help put a spotlight on skin cancer.
Welcome back to What's Going On with Martha Love. I am your guest host today, Tosha Davis, and I'm here interviewing Raheem Islam, the president and CEO of Universal Companies. So Raheem, we took a break, we came back, and we are going to move forward now. We are in Milwaukee. Universal has done all these wonderful things. They've been in real estate development. They've been in community organizing and neighborhood redevelopment, master planning to some point, and education. And so fast forward, we're now here in Milwaukee. So what's going on in Milwaukee now with Universal?
Well, fundamental to the success that we believe is lessons learned from 20 years of experience in trying to rebuild our community is there's a whole lot of things we got to be able to do, but there's a couple things we have to be able to do well. And education is one, real estate development, community development is another, and then community organizing is another. And so we've come into Milwaukee over the last, I would say, 3 years with the intent of doing all three. Sometimes, one leads faster than the other, and the lead in Milwaukee was education. So we had an opportunity very early on in the last 3 years to identify the schools the type of schools we would run, the buildings where they would be, and so those things kind of got defined for us. Now then the next step was not only perfecting the operations for the education for those schools and recruiting students, recruiting staff, and making the education work in Milwaukee, is now to then step outside those schools and start doing the other two areas that we thought were very important. So while we were kind of rolling out our schools in Milwaukee, we were meeting with, anybody and everybody. Mm-hmm. A lot of the work, introductions of people and others, and then we meet with somebody says you need to meet with somebody, all trying to get an understanding for how Milwaukee is operating. What are the players, who are the people, who are the content specialists, who are the experts, who are the people, are the freedom fighters, who are out there fighting the fight, so we get a better understanding of how do we organize. We know that at the school level, the schools have to be organized. The schools where the buildings sit, in the neighborhoods that they sit in, have to be organized. The external support systems have to be organized to support those schools. So fundamentally, to assess the long-term success of any school, or which we believe, and any neighborhood, is the organizing that has to take place. And so we're now in the process of now defining what that looks like. First, again, assessing what does the kind of asset mapping, what assets does Milwaukee have? Where are the pockets of strength? Where are the influential people and the experts in the different areas? And then along the way, we were very, very lucky to stumble into another school, as sometimes it happens. Sometimes it's just not automatic. It's just being in the right space, being in the right time. Sometimes things happen. And that's what happened to us on the education side, on the expansion. So we have now, starting in the last 3 years, come September, we'll have 4 schools operating. The last of those 4 schools is a Lee Elementary School. And the Lee Elementary School, where it's located, it's almost identical and gives us a number of characteristics that really are geared towards what Universal does best.
The mission and the model.
Really place-based neighborhood transformation, with the school being at the core. So what does that look like? That looks like, one, a thriving education elementary school. It looks like rebuilding the housings and the infrastructure around the school, which is definitely needed in that neighborhood. It looks like a thriving neighborhood associations. It looks like a rebuilding of a commercial corridor, which is critical to a healthy neighborhood. And we've now started to develop a project that we believe will be the catalyst for the rebuilding of that commercial corridor in this neighborhood called Bronzeville or North Avenue. It looks like an organizing effort where the community understands that this process is a process that we all have to get behind. It's not a lead problem, or it's not a Universal problem, or a Raheem problem, or Lindsay Heights problem, or a Bronzeville problem. This is a black problem and a black issue. And we all need to be behind it, because if we can create this model, or at least support this model, we can now transfer this knowledge to another neighborhood. And then we can start getting traction. So that's what we've been doing, in addition to mechanically building some foundational benchmarks that we can get, having the lead school, rebuilding the lead school, right, getting the school open. You can't get around these really tough things. Getting the Garfield project, real estate development project, coming up with scattered housing development strategies. All those things have been done, and now then we're kind of selling that idea to the black community and saying to the black community first, that get behind this and we all win. And that's something different and unique that hasn't taken place not only in Milwaukee, but it hasn't taken place in around the country. We have been too siloed, we've been too fractured, and we have diluted our strength to the point where we are not effective at all as a community.
Coming together and collaborating.
Right.
And speaking of collaborations, I want to point out, which this might not be important in other markets, but here in Milwaukee, Universal is what type of a charter?
MPS charter.
Okay.
And that's was critical because one of the myths that we've also tried to, in our process, is bring people together. We looked at aligning ourselves with sometimes, quote unquote, the enemy.
Exactly. But right.
You know, and so, but it's just misinformation.
Right.
Sure. Are there bad people in places? Yes, there are bad people, but they're good people too.
Right.
The question for us is what will prevail. And the other thing is you got to connect with people who have a mission. So if you have an agenda, which we do, and they have an agenda, we don't go and sit around and talk about things we don't agree on. We go there and talk about things we do agree on. And we're trying now to break down the barrier that fundamentally we cannot replace an MPS. An MPS is going to be here to stay. Our goal is to complement MPS, to work with MPS, to grow MPS, to strengthen MPS, and to show that we could do this together. And so that's been one of the fundamental strategies of Universal, of alliance building, is to build alliances with resource-based organizations like MPS. And don't look at it as they're doing their thing and we're doing our thing. No, these are our children, our children, and we're going to do this together. And so MPS, under the leadership of Dr. Thornton and now under the leadership of Dr. Driver, embraces that concept. Unfortunately, we embrace it at my level. We embrace it at her level. We got to now get other levels to embrace it. But it starts first with us coming together. So we're not asking people to a vision that doesn't exist. Right. We're asking them to having a vision of something that actually exists right now and that they can tangibly work on. So that's fundamental to organizing, fundamentally to building, is to present an argument of something tangible that we could do today.
So the Lee School is going to be opening this fall. It's a K-4 through 5th grade. The high school, which will be opening its first class also this fall of the UACB, which is Universal Academy for the College Bound, is opening its 9th grade this fall as well in the Webster building,
Right.
which also houses the middle school. So that'll be 2 schools at the Webster campus, the new Lee campus, newly renovated Lee campus, and then also there is another school that is just a symbol of Milwaukee that a lot of people know about. And when you came here, I think you found out that more people had attended that school than you even knew, which is the Green Bay campus.
Right. Again, one of the concepts that we were aligned, and again, we didn't start out like this, but it clearly was part of our makeup and our mission, is to restore some of the damage that has been done to our communities. There's been so much damage. There have been so many decisions made, and the impact of those decisions has been absolutely detrimental. Absolutely. I mean, you close a Green Bay, and the bottom line, you close it in a stroke of a pen. But the damage is long term.
Right.
I mean, because you said so many people who are born and raised in Milwaukee went to Green Bay, have fond memories of Green Bay, and like everything, or like a lot of things in the black community, we lose it.
Right.
And so it's just more psychological damage to our community, but it's also a physical damage. When you close a plant of that size, and now you take it off the rolls and you mothball it, what does it do to the physical community?
Right.
Come to find out that it was such a community asset, not only the building and the children going to the school to be educated, but the building and the physical space now became mothballed, where they had the tennis programs, the basketball programs, just the recreation. And now the community is no longer able to breathe.
There's a void.
It's a major physical void. So not only do you have a psychological problem going on, you have a physical problem that it shows up in all kinds of ways. But it also begins to psychologically damage a neighborhood physically. So one of the things we were extremely excited about is we understood that. So we understood that going in. And now we can, with pride, say to the black community, we're restoring it. We're going to bring education back and connect the dots between the historical education and today's education. Now Green Bay is now alive again. Our next challenge for us is now to take those amenities, those physical amenities, the recreation facilities, and turn that back over to the community again. And so both Green Bay and Lee School are ideal to be able to do that. And it's going to take time, but when you look back, the community is going to say, they're going to feel good. Because again, this is something really a new paradigm, where once it's closed, it's closed. We're now fixing decisions that were made that were damaging to our community and correcting them and putting them back into the community.
So resuscitating, for lack of a better word.
And so that's the mission of Universal. That's what Universal's mission is. And not talk about it, but do it. Not dream about it, but make it happen. And trust me, there are a lot of problems associated, or a lot of challenges associated with doing it. But what mitigates that challenge is the organization of the community. If the community understands it, if the community starts to rally behind it, if the community says it wants it, then that agenda and that voice becomes louder, and it becomes easy for Universal to do what it needs to do. Not just Universal, but any black organization who is trying to do the work of saving our community. It's going to need a voice behind it that right now it does not have. And so we must organize the community to alert them of what their role is. So we have a role, government has a role, MPS has a role, the city has a role, state has a role, but you have a role too. And you might not think you have a role, because you've been pretty much, it hasn't been well documented that your role is powerful. It doesn't seem like your role could mean anything. It's like voting. You know, look at the voting turnout and see how low the turnout is because people feel fundamentally that it don't mean anything. Well, that transfers into people power. That transfers into the power of the people. If the people don't feel empowered, they don't feel that their power or they have any power. So why bother? We have to now show they have all the power in the world. They have more power than any group in Milwaukee or in areas like Philadelphia and Newark, and where we have the majority and minority. We are the majority. We have more power than any other group. We just don't know it.
So to jump from that, that's a perfect segue. So the real estate is moving. The schools are moving, 4 schools, MPS charter schools. Now in those communities surrounding the schools and the city at large, there's another organizing effort that is taking place, which is actually the third bucket, third wheel, third leg of this universal plan. What is that?
Well, it's organizing period. But here's, for example, we look in a neighborhood and so what's missing? Okay, so one, the school's got to be organized. And trust me, that ain't automatic. That just ain't automatic. Starting with the principal all the way down. They got to work as a team. And in the education environment, it's completely opposite. That's not the way it is.
Doesn't lead us.
It's usually the principal is the boss, and everybody got to kind of submit to this boss. That ain't the way Universal approaches it. So we got to do that. Then looking out in the neighborhood and find out what are the neighborhood associations, how is it neighborhood organizing, working with those. So what we've been doing, we've now polished kind of a bigger kind of vehicle to organize our community on a multi-fronts. And that's called, in Philadelphia, we call the Philadelphia Community of Leaders. It's been around now very, very early, roughly about 18 months. We worked on it previous there for about 2 years of organizing, meeting with people, discussing, and asking a very basic question to those who are out here, fighting the fight. If they were successful, the question is, would they change anything? And the answer is overwhelming, soberly, non-emotionally. The answer is no. So the question, if you're doing all you can do, and you're not going to change the conditions that we talked about, the high levels of poverty, and the growing levels of poverty, we have the first generation of children doing worse than their parents ever in the history of America. America it was always built on this foundation that our children would do better than the parents. And we've had that kind of generational gains for, since we've been emancipated. I mean, we've been extremely successful in that area. But now it's flipping. We have the fastest growing low-income class that's coming out of our so-called middle class. So our middle class is depopulating and our poor class is growing. This is the first. We have more children living in poverty now than we've ever had. We have more children living in unstable environments. So not just poverty. Sometimes we lived in poverty when I grew up in poverty, but we didn't know it.
Right.
We still had a very healthy life, very strong community life. So it's a different situation going on right now today. So you ask the question, if you're successful in the area that you're working in, would it change these conditions? No. So what is it going to take? It's going to take some kind of way of us aggregating our capacities, aligning our agendas together, creating one agenda where we all understand that this is the agenda we're working on. More can plug into that agenda, but most importantly, that agenda can be passed down to the next generation, because this is a long-term fight. We're not going to overcome 500 years of oppression in 1 year or in 10 years or in 50 years. This is an ongoing fight, and that's something I believe fundamentally our great leaders in fighting the fight, one of the greatest human rights fights in the history of humanity is one, the emancipation of black people from slavery, and two, the civil rights fights of the 60s. Those are some tremendous human rights fights that will go down in the annals of history to show the capacity of black people being oppressed and winning a fight. But it wasn't over. We had to continue it. And now our movement has been mothballed for, I would believe, for the last 40 years or so. And now we got to now restart that movement because we now continue to have human rights issues because the mass incarceration is probably the worst, the biggest form of human rights violation in the history of humanity. And second, there's no greater human right fight than economic rights. And so we're not going to be able to obtain those economic rights and fight for those human rights if we're not organized. And we have to give the next generation a blueprint so that they're not starting over. We don't add 15 more years of inactivity. We can give them something to work with, and that's the goal of our organization. That's our goal of organizing. And fundamentally, I think most sober-minded people who are not intoxicated with one ideology or one philosophy, who are looking at our reality, they've come to the conclusion. Now the question is how.
Okay.
And now we're working on strategies of how. And the challenge is still a very daunting challenge because I liken it to a community that's basically been addicted to inactivity. And that addiction to inactivity is similar to a long-term addiction to heroin. And so we got to go through a withdrawal period. And when we get through the withdrawal period, so somebody has to lead us through the withdrawal period. And the only way you're going to be led through the withdrawal period, you have to keep and aggregate and get a critical mass of people believing in that they can get through the withdrawal period and that the success will be handled or achieved when we get through the withdrawal period. And getting through the withdrawal period alone is success. You ask a long-term addict two things. Do they want to change? Absolutely. Can they? No. So if they're able to now acknowledge that, that's success. Second, if they're able to go through some kind of withdrawal and get there, that's success. But it doesn't change their economic situation. It don't change their educational situation. They're still going to have to go out and get a job. They're going to still have to now repair the things they've done, the damage they've done along when they were in this inactive period. We're going to have to do the same thing. But we're going to have to now redefine what success looks like. It's not fixing mass incarceration. It's the preparation for it. It's not rebuilding our neighborhoods. It's the preparation for it. But unless we do this, we will be looking at these issues for the rest of our lives. And the next generation is going to do the same thing. And whenever we figure out that we come to that conclusion, that's when we start to get traction. I believe that this generation can do it. I believe this generation can make that contribution just like the contributions that were made in our civil rights gains. That's just like the contribution made in the abolishment of slavery. Just like the contributions, I think we're prepared to make those contributions. And I see the symbols, the signs all around that we have. But I think it just got to be organized. It cannot be organic. There got to be some organic that goes on, but the systems we're up against are well-tuned, well-financed, well-resourced. And one of the biggest issues that the systems we're facing are the believability in those systems and the non-believability in the people. So we're going to have to do something serious. Like if a patient is, almost dead, is laying on that cart, they put the electric and shock them. The shock them. We got to do that kind of shock to get through this grace period that I think is the withdrawal from inactivity to activity, much more scientific, much more precise, and much more purposeful, as opposed to this loosey-goosey way we think we're going to address these issues.
So in this organizing and coming together, what are the core principles that will be addressed when this MCOL, Milwaukee Community Leaders, which is also something that has been done in Philadelphia and is looking to be done in other markets?
Well, let me just say this. It's being done, and it's not without its challenges. one of the core principles, we have to look to the future. We have to build for the future. Brothers and sisters, my position is and I think we can have a good time in doing it. It's not like, I don't want to paint. Yeah, I don't want to paint this picture that is going to be, because when we say, first of all and we all got to do, we need a critical mass of people to change anything. There's a critical mass. Even neighborhoods, all you need is a critical mass. And sometimes that's not the majority. It doesn't have to be in the majority of people. It could just be a nucleus of people who say, we're going to get this done. Mm-hmm. And so we want to dispel that, because people thinking that going in, they think it got to be all of us.
Right.
That's not the case. It's never been the case. It never will be the case. It's not necessary. But we definitely need a few people who are committed. And they have to be committed to the future. And that means we have to be able to look at systems, outcomes, but we have to examine the continuums to figure out how we're going to address not only the outcomes, but the systems that are producing the outcomes. So you can look at mass incarceration, but you got 3 systems you got to impact if you're going to change. You got the enforcement system. So you can't really talk about mass incarceration and not deal with how they're actually enforcing and rounding up our young men and produce them into a criminal court system that's sentencing them to a prison system that's not rehabilitating them. So those 3 systems have to be changed. So we have to not only look at outcomes, we got to look at the whole continuum. But we also, it requires a much more disciplined, much more sober approach. So we have to look at the future, meaning that we have to be able to do something for today, enough to get movement. But a lot of our work has to be for tomorrow, the future. And guess what? This is not uncommon for any civilized world. That's the way it's done. Every generation has always done enough for that generation, but more for the next generation. And this is what we have to do in our organizing.
So we're going to be wrapping up, but I want to ask you just one last question. If you had to say that there were 4 things that 3, 4, however many you have, that this Milwaukee community leaders, Philadelphia community leaders are going to address or organize, what would those things be?
There are 4 areas that I think that are fundamental to the area. One, we've addressed the issue of poverty. We believe is the big ticket item. If we can impact poverty, we can halt poverty, slow it down, or even reduce it or stop it. Everybody's life would be better. And those 3 areas are education, economics, the public safety, because those are the 3 areas. And then the 4th was probably one that most will not fathom that will come in that, and that's the restoration of Black pride. We have to begin to feel good about ourselves. We have to combat the media of negativity about Black people. We have to build Black institutions of social and cultural Black organizations. We have to reinstill a feeling of being good about being Black, and recognize that is not happening right now.
Well, Raheem, we look forward to hearing more about the Milwaukee community leaders. We look forward to the schools that are opening here and to the real estate development. It has been a pleasure to interview you. Again, we want to thank our host, Martha Love, for having us here on her show, What's Going On. And again, you've been listening to Raheem Islam, the president and CEO of Universal Companies. Thank you, Martha.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? What's going on? In the meantime, right
An MCM production.